The rain had stopped just as they lowered my husband's coffin into the ground, leaving behind a smell of wet earth and roses. I remember staring at the polished mahogany box, unable to reconcile that the man I'd shared 45 years with now lay silent beneath that glossy surface. My fingers trembled as I clutched the folded handkerchief, its edges embroidered by his mother long before we met. The priest's voice echoed faintly through the cemetery air, but I barely heard him. My mind replayed the laughter, the arguments, the quiet evenings when we'd sit by the window sipping tea, thinking we'd understood everything about each other. When the last shovel of soil landed on the coffin, something inside me finally broke, not in tears but in a hollow, numbing ache that spread through my chest like frost. People approached with condolences, touching my arm, whispering words I didn't absorb. They called him a good man, a devoted husband, a pillar of the community. Each phrase sliced through me because it sounded rehearsed, as if they were describing a man who existed only in their imagination. It wasn't until later, after everyone left, that the funeral director handed me a sealed envelope. He asked this to be given to you only after the burial, he said, his eyes kind but distant. The envelope bore my name, Margaret, in his handwriting. I froze. The familiar cursive, elegant yet slightly slanted, stirred something deep inside me. Why would he leave a letter for me, and why only after his funeral? That night I sat in the empty living room, surrounded by fading flowers and untouched food trays. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. I lit a single lamp, the same one he used to read under. The light felt too soft for what I was about to do. My fingers hesitated on the flap of the envelope, my heart pounding louder than the rain outside. Inside was a folded piece of paper, thick and yellowed at the edges, as if he'd written it long ago. His scent lingered faintly on it, a mix of old books and cedar wood. I unfolded it, expecting love, apologies, maybe a few final words of reassurance. But what I read instead made my breath catch. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, I am gone, and what I must tell you can no longer wait. For most of our marriage, I lived 2 lives, one with you and another built on secrets I never had the courage to reveal. The words blurred. I gripped the paper tighter, blinking rapidly. My chest burned. 2 lives? I read again, slower this time, as if understanding might dull the pain. You must know the truth, no matter how much it hurts you now. I never wanted to deceive you, but the past refused to stay buried. I stopped. My husband George was the most predictable man I'd ever known. He hated surprises, kept every bill organized, every photograph labeled, and yet here he was, from the grave, confessing to a secret life. A storm began to build outside. Thunder rolled faintly. I folded the letter, unable to finish it that night. Instead, I placed it on the table and stared at it for hours. It felt alive, like it was waiting for me to open it again and see what was truly inside. The next morning, I brewed his favorite coffee, as if doing so could keep him near. The aroma filled the house with bittersweet comfort. I sat again by the letter, unable to decide if I wanted to know the rest. But curiosity and dread intertwined like twin vines around my heart. Finally, I continued, The woman's name is Evelyn. We met before you and I married. I thought that part of my life was over, but she reappeared 15 years ago with a child." My vision dimmed. A chill spread through me. 15 years ago, he would have been in his late 50s. We had just celebrated our 30th anniversary that year. We'd renewed our vows. How could he have had another woman, another child then? The words ran together. I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, but the house was too still, too aware. Outside, the wind howled like it shared my disbelief. Part 2, 1000 words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining Evelyn, her face, her voice, the way she must have looked at him. Was she younger? Prettier? Did she know about me? I'd always prided myself on being observant. How could I have missed it? In the days following the funeral, I went through George's belongings, desperate for answers. His desk drawers were neatly arranged, as always, but behind the photo albums, I found an old wooden box. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some were of George at company events, but a few showed him with a woman I didn't recognize. She had dark hair, striking eyes, and a smile that looked far too familiar now that I'd read her name, Evelyn. One photo made my stomach twist. George stood beside a teenage boy, same square jaw, same hazel eyes. My heart pounded so hard I nearly dropped the photo. The letter's words echoed in my mind, "with a child." I realized with icy certainty that this boy was his. I sank to the floor, the photo trembling in my hands. My whole marriage, our quiet mornings, our vacations, our anniversaries suddenly felt staged, like a play whose script I'd never been given. How long had he smiled at me while keeping this secret tucked behind that gentle gaze? I needed to know more, and so I kept reading. Evelyn didn't ask for much, only that I help raise the boy from a distance. His name is Daniel. I sent them money, visited sometimes, and told you I was traveling for business. Please understand, Margaret, I never stopped loving you. I only failed at being the man I wanted to be. I dropped the letter again, anger replacing grief. Please understand? How could he ask me that? For 15 years, he'd built a life parallel to ours. I had cooked his meals, washed his clothes, cared for him through illness while he lived a lie. By evening, I poured myself a drink, something I rarely did. The amber liquid burned down my throat. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to burn the letter. But every time I tried, I remembered the man who once stayed up all night nursing me through the flu, the man who cried when our dog died, the man who held my hand when my sister passed. Could love and deceit exist together? Could a man truly live 2 lives without one destroying the other? Days turned into weeks. The letter haunted me. I found myself searching for Daniel online, though I wasn't sure what I'd say if I found him. One afternoon, while going through George's old address book, I found an entry under E. Carter, Oakwood Lane. My pulse quickened. Evelyn Carter? It was only a 30-minute drive away. That night, I sat by the window, debating whether to go. My heart said yes, my pride said no. But as dawn broke, I realized I couldn't live with unanswered questions. The next morning, I drove to Oakwood Lane. The road was quiet. lined with maples shedding their last autumn leaves. Number 17 stood modestly among them, a pale yellow house with blue shutters. My hands shook as I parked. Through the window I saw a young man, maybe in his 20s, reading at a table. He had George's eyes. I didn't knock right away. I just stood there, watching, torn between the urge to run and the need to understand. Finally, the door opened. A woman stepped out, Evelyn. Older now, maybe in her late 50s, but graceful. She froze when she saw me, recognition flickering in her eyes before I even spoke. "Margaret," she said softly. My breath caught. She knew my name. For a long moment, Evelyn and I just stared at each other, both unsure which one of us had the right to speak first. The cold wind rustled between us, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp soil. I noticed how calm her eyes were, like someone who had spent years preparing for this day. My own hands, though, were trembling so badly I had to clasp them together to hide it. "You knew who I was," I finally whispered, my voice almost breaking. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, George told me. One day you might come." I felt a sharp twist inside my chest. He knew? He had planned for this confrontation even after death. That thought alone sent a shiver through me. "Can I come in?" I asked, though my voice barely carried. She stepped aside. The warmth of her small home was suffocating. Photographs covered the walls, smiling faces, Christmas dinners, a boy growing into a man. Each picture seemed to echo a life I should have known but didn't. "That's Daniel," she said quietly, following my gaze. "He's at work right now. He doesn't know you're here." I swallowed hard. "Does he know about me?" Evelyn sighed. "He knows his father was married. He knows your name, but he doesn't know the full truth. George wanted to tell him himself, but he never got the chance." Her words floated in the stillness between us. I could hear the ticking of a small clock somewhere in the kitchen. "Why?" I asked after a pause. "Why did you let this go on for so long? Why didn't either of you tell me?" Evelyn's eyes glistened. "Because he loved you, Margaret. I saw it every time he spoke your name. I wasn't proud of it being the other woman, but I was young when it started again. I thought he'd leave you one day, but he never did. And after Daniel was born, it just became something neither of us knew how to undo." Her honesty stung worse than lies. I could see that she wasn't cruel, just broken in a different way. And I hated her for it, even though a small part of me pitied her. "I spent my life believing we were happy," I murmured, more to myself than her. Every smile, every anniversary, every time he said, "I love you," was that all rehearsed? "No," she said firmly. "He meant it. Both times. With both of us." The words cut deeper than anything she could have said. I felt suddenly lightheaded. I turned toward the window, watching the sunlight scatter through the branches outside. My reflection in the glass looked older, smaller, like a ghost of the woman I once was. When I turned back, Evelyn was holding something in her hands, a smaller envelope. "He left this for you," she said. "He asked me to give it to you if you ever came." I hesitated, my breath uneven as I took it. The handwriting was his again. My fingers shook as I broke the seal. "Margaret, if you are reading this, it means you have met Evelyn. I knew one day you might. Please don't hate her." What began as a mistake became something I didn't know how to control, but I never stopped being your husband in every way that mattered. There's one more truth I owe you. Daniel is not just my son, he is also my heir. I put part of my savings in a trust for him. You'll find the documents in my old study. Please don't let anger destroy what's left of us. I could barely breathe. A trust? He had hidden money, our money, for a secret child. My throat tightened as if someone had tied a rope around it. I wanted to scream, to throw the letter at her feet, but instead I folded it carefully, my movements slow, deliberate. "I suppose I should thank you," I said quietly, "for telling me the truth, though I don't know what truth even means anymore." Evelyn wiped a tear. "He didn't want to hurt you. He was ashamed, Margaret. You were the one he built his home with. I was just a piece of the past he never let go." Her voice cracked on the last word. I turned toward the door before my heart betrayed me and softened. As I stepped outside, she called after me. "He used to sit here and talk about you. He said you were the only person who ever truly knew his soul." I froze. For a moment, the ground seemed to tilt beneath me. Maybe he had loved me after all, but love, I realized then, was no guarantee of loyalty. I drove home in silence. The trees blurred past through my tears. When I reached the house, I went straight to his study. The scent of old paper and dust greeted me like a memory. I pulled open the bottom drawer, and there it was, a sealed folder labeled, "For Daniel." I sat on the floor, clutching it to my chest, and wept until the night blurred into dawn. Morning crept into the house like a polite intruder, soft, apologetic, unwilling to disturb the ruins it found. I brewed tea because it gave my hands something to do, and I held the cup so tightly the porcelain warmed my bones. The folder labeled "For Daniel" sat on the table like a small, watchful animal. I didn't want to open it yet. I wanted to go back to a time when a folder was just a folder and not an instrument that could cut the rest of your life in two. By mid-morning, I called our attorney, well, my attorney now, Mr. Whitaker had known us for years. I told him I needed to understand certain allocations. He didn't press for details. Grief trains people to be careful with their questions. When I arrived at his office, he stood slowly, his sorrow sincere and heavy. "I'm so sorry, Margaret," he said. "George was a complicated man," I finished, surprising both of us. In the quiet of his book-lined office, I handed over the folder. Whitaker read in silence, his finger tracking the lines. He hummed under his breath sometimes, a habit that had once made me fond of him and now made me want to shake him. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me with the gentleness of someone who has to unwrap a bandage they know will reopen a wound. "It's a trust, yes," he said. "Established 15 years ago. But, Margaret, the funds came from an inheritance George received from an uncle. Legally, it was separate property." The words landed like dull thuds. "So he didn't steal from our savings?" "No," Whitaker said carefully. "He didn't. He was meticulous about keeping the accounts separate." He hesitated. "There's also a letter here addressed to you, filed with the trust. He must have anticipated that one day you'd need context." He slid the single sheet to me, George's hand again, unflinching in its careful loops. I kept what was yours. Yours. I kept what was mine. Mine. I failed you in truth, not in theft. Forgive me if you can. I pressed my lips together until the ache steadied. There are many ways to betray someone, I thought. Ledger lines can't absolve a broken vow. Whitaker cleared his throat. There's one more thing. An item receipt. A safety deposit box at the Oak Street Bank. You're listed as an authorized party. It appears he wanted you to have access. I took the key. It was small and cold and heavier than it looked. Outside, the air tasted of frost even though the sun sat bright and indifferent in a pale sky. I didn't go to the bank. Instead, I drove home and made myself sit at the dining table like a woman who still believed in order. I dialed a number I had written on the back of a takeout receipt. Oakwood Lane. The line rang twice. Hello? A young man's voice steady, cautious. Is this Daniel? My voice came out thinner than I expected. A pause. A quick, quiet inhalation that carried a lifetime across a wire. Yes. Who's this? My name is Margaret, I said, and the room spun and stilled all at once. I am George's wife. There was no clatter, no slammed phone, just a slow exhale. I know who you are, he said. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near the park, the kind of place where old couples sit in companionable silence and teenagers take pictures of their coffee. I got there early and sat by the window. When Daniel walked in, I knew him even before he glanced around. The angle of his brow, the way he scanned the room with polite caution, George used to do the same when we entered crowded church halls. He approached my table, uncertain, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets like a boy's. Mrs. Clark? He asked softly. Please, I said, standing to greet him. Call me Margaret. He sat. For a moment we were two continents drifting toward or away from each other. I wasn't sure which. The waitress left water and a thin trail of steam from a neighboring kettle. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. I'm sorry for your loss, he said. Thank you, I replied, and realized the words had started to harden like clay. Did you go to the funeral? He shook his head. He asked me not to. He said it would complicate things for you. Complicate, the gentlest word for a devastating storm. How much did you know? I asked. He thought for a long moment. Enough to feel grateful and confused by the same man, he said. He visited sometimes. We'd walk by the lake. He'd ask about school, my work. He never promised more than he could give. But when he got sick, he started writing me letters instead of coming. Sick? The word snagged. Daniel's eyes flicked to mine, surprised. You didn't know? My skin went cold. Know what? He told me he had something he called a shadow on his liver. He didn't want to make a fuss. Said he'd handle it quietly and keep your life peaceful. I told him that didn't sound peaceful at all. The cafe faded into a hum of cups and spoons. I thought of the winter he said he had stomach troubles, the tidy way he hid fatigue behind after dinner walks, how he started insisting I sit and let him wash the dishes. I had mistaken tenderness for habit. I had not recognized surrender. He never said a word, I murmured. Daniel's voice softened. He was angry at his choices. He didn't want you to carry the weight of them while carrying the weight of him. Is that noble or cowardly? I haven't decided. I almost smiled. I haven't decided either. We spoke for an hour. He told me about his job at the hardware store, the way he fixed old radios for neighbors just to see if he could coax life from a stubborn coil. He laughed easily, but always with a trace of apology, as if every ounce of joy needed permission. When I stood to leave, he reached into his pocket. "I have something for you," he said. He placed a square of folded paper on the table. "He asked me to give it to you when we met. Said it might help." My hands shook again, the new normal, it seemed. I unfolded the paper. It was a photograph of George and me on our wedding day, worn at the edges, on the back, in his hand. For every promise I kept and the ones I failed, my love was real. Grief swelled and receded like a tide dragging pebbles. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure who I was thanking. We parted with an awkward wave that felt like a bow from two actors leaving a stage they had never auditioned for. Outside, the wind pushed at my coat, urging me forward. I drove straight to the Oak Street Bank. The vault room was colder than the day, a sterile hush humming beneath fluorescent lights. The clerk led me to a small booth, set the box down, and left me with the simple click of a closing door. I slid the key in. The box yielded with a stubborn sigh. Inside lay an old leather notebook, a manila envelope, and a surprise that startled a breath from me George's watch. The silver one he wore every day for 30 years. I lifted it carefully. The back had an engraving I had never seen. "Time is how I failed you. Love is how I tried." The date below was from 15 years ago. My throat tightened. I opened the notebook. It wasn't a journal exactly, more like fragments, vignettes in his looping hand, pages about me. The pink sweater I wore the autumn we planted tulips, the way my voice softened on the word home. Pages about Daniel, his proud walk after fixing a bicycle chain, the nervous way he touched his hair before interviews, pages about fear, pages about small courages, and threaded through it all, a quiet, repeating apology. At the bottom of the box, the manila envelope held two things: a storage unit receipt with a key taped to it, and a letter addressed to both Margaret and Daniel. "If you're opening this together or apart, I wanted you to have what I could not hold, a single life made from two truths. The storage unit holds the rest, documents, photographs, and something I should have given you years ago. Whatever you find, please finish it together." The word "together" pinned me to the chair. I could see us, Daniel and I, standing in some concrete room under humming lights, opening a door we did not ask for. I closed my eyes and saw George as he had been at his gentlest, sleeves rolled, eyes warm, a man who believed he could mend anything with enough patience. Even the human heart, it seemed. I left the bank with the box's contents arranged in my bag as carefully as relics. The evening had deepened. Streetlights blinked awake. I stood on the sidewalk and dialed the only number that made sense now. "Hello," Daniel's voice again, that steady thread. "There's a storage unit," I said, the words condensing in the night. "There are things he wanted us to see us, not just me." A pause. I heard him breathe, the pause of someone choosing forward. "Tell me where to meet you," he said. As I read him the address, a strange thing happened. The ache in my chest didn't disappear, but it shifted. Like a heavy piece of furniture moved an inch to reveal light on the floor. I looked up at the sky, clear now, sharp with a new moon, and let the night tuck the cold into my coat. The keys felt heavy in my palm, but at last my hand had stopped shaking. The next afternoon, the sky was bruised with gray clouds when Daniel and I met again. The storage unit was on the outskirts of town, tucked between an auto shop and a row of rusting containers. The sign above the gate read, "Safe Keep Storage," the irony not lost on me. George had built his whole life around the illusion of safety, every drawer locked, every truth hidden behind civility. And now, here we were, about to unlock the one door that held what was left of him. Daniel arrived before I did. He was leaning against his car, jacket zipped up, his breath visible in the cold air. When he saw me, he straightened quickly. "You sure you want to do this today?" he asked. "I've waited long enough," I replied quietly. "Let's finish what he started." Inside, the corridor smelled of dust and faint oil, the kind of air that remembers everything. Our footsteps echoed as we found Unit 43B. The key in my hand rattled against the lock. For a second, I thought I might drop it. Daniel stood beside me, his face unreadable, a reflection of both of us, perhaps. The door rolled up with a metallic groan, revealing a space lined with boxes, an old trunk, and a wooden chest covered in a sheet. Dust motes floated in the thin beam of light, spilling from the doorway. For a moment we just stared, afraid to disturb it. I stepped forward first. On one of the boxes, a label read, "For Margaret." Another read, "For Daniel." The rest were unmarked. My hands went instinctively to the one with my name. I tore the tape open, heart pounding. Inside were photo albums, letters, and the familiar scent of lavender, the same scent of the sachets I used in our drawers at home. He had saved them, every one. I opened an album. The first photo stopped my breath, George and I, in our garden, me holding up a basket of freshly picked tomatoes, laughing while he looked at me. The caption beneath, written in his looping handwriting, said, "The happiest sound on earth." My vision blurred with tears. Every page after that was filled with moments from our life together, dinners, anniversaries, vacations. But tucked between the pages, I found something else: receipts from hotel stays, train tickets, dates that overlapped with our anniversaries, evidence of the double life that had existed within the same calendar pages. Daniel knelt beside the box with his name and opened it silently. Inside were old toys, drawings, birthday cards, some unopened, some written in a hurry. He picked one up and read aloud, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry I couldn't make it, son. I promise next year will be different. Dad." He laughed bitterly. "He wrote this every year," Daniel said softly, "and it never was different. I wanted to tell him I understood, but how could I? My life had been the stage he stood behind. We were both part of the same betrayal, just playing different roles in his unfinished play. We sat on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by boxes and silence. The world outside was distant, Time folded in on itself, trapping us between his lies and his longing. Then Daniel noticed the wooden chest. "There's something here," he said. Together we pulled off the sheet and lifted the lid. Inside lay an envelope addressed to both of us again. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "If you're reading this, it means I'm finally free of the fear that ruled me. I built 2 lives because I was too weak to choose. Margaret, you gave me stability, grace, and forgiveness I never deserved. Daniel, you gave me purpose when I thought I had none left. I spent my final years trying to make peace between the 2 halves of myself and failing. This chest holds the only thing that ever made me whole." We looked inside. Beneath the letter was a small box wrapped in blue velvet. I opened it slowly. Inside was a locket. On one side, a photo of me on our wedding day. On the other, Daniel as a child. Both halves of his world, side by side. Daniel exhaled shakily. "He really did try, didn't he?" "Yes," I whispered. "But love without courage is just unfinished." He nodded, his eyes glistening. Then he reached for another folder at the bottom of the chest. It was labeled, "To be read only together." Inside were typed pages, his last will and personal reflections, written in George's familiar, meticulous style. He had left detailed instructions that the 2 of us, and only the 2 of us, would decide what to do with his belongings, that nothing be destroyed in anger, nothing kept out of guilt, that we were to share one dinner together, just one, to talk about him, not as a husband or a father, but as a man. It was strange, sitting there in that cold, dusty space, realizing that the man who'd hidden so much was now dictating how we should find closure. But maybe, in his flawed way, he wanted us to understand the pieces he couldn't connect. We packed everything gently. Before closing the chest, I took one last look at the locket and the letter. "Do you want to keep this?" I asked Daniel. He shook his head. "No, you keep it. It started with you. I just want to remember him as human, not as the myth he made of himself." That night, we followed his last wish. We met again for dinner at a small, quiet restaurant overlooking the lake. The same lake where George used to take Daniel for walks, and where he once promised to build me a boathouse he never built. The air was cool, the water still. The waiter brought candlelight that flickered between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said, almost shyly, "You know, I think he loved us both the only way he knew how, imperfectly." I nodded, tears warming my eyes. "Yes," I said, "and maybe that's all love ever is, imperfect, but still love." When I returned home that night, I placed the locket on the mantelpiece beside his photo. For the first time, the room didn't feel haunted. It felt full of truth, of pain, of the quiet possibility that forgiveness might someday follow. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows like a sigh finally released, and though the ache remained, it was no longer unbearable, because I knew beneath every lie he told there had still been something real. It's strange how life continues after truth is revealed. The days no longer feel like walls closing in. They're open, uncertain, but lighter somehow. A month had passed since Daniel and I opened that storage unit, yet I still found myself reaching for the notebook George left behind, rereading pieces of his handwriting late at night. There was comfort in the loops of his letters, even when they carried sorrow. Every morning, I walked to the garden behind our home, the same one we'd tended together for decades. The winter had thinned the soil, but the tulip bulbs still waited underneath, stubborn in their promise to bloom again. I spoke to them sometimes, the way old women talk to ghosts. Maybe I was talking to him, or maybe to myself. One chilly morning, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat but firm. It was from Daniel. "Margaret, I've been thinking about that night at the restaurant, about how you said love can still be real even when it breaks us. I've decided to move closer to town. There's a place near the lake that needs someone to manage the store. I'd like to visit sometimes, if that's all right. I think my father would have wanted us to. Thank you for seeing him as more than his mistakes, Daniel." I pressed the letter against my chest, tears rising uninvited. Perhaps this was the peace George had hoped for two wounded people learning to exist without bitterness. A week later, Daniel visited. He looked different, calmer, more at ease. I made tea and we sat by the fireplace, the locket resting between us. "Do you ever hate him?" he asked quietly. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "No," I said finally. "I don't hate him. I hate the cowardice, the silence, the years we both lost. But hate him? No, because even in his lies, he left traces of love. And maybe that's worse. It's harder to let go of someone who loved you imperfectly." Daniel nodded slowly. "You sound like him," he said with a sad smile. We laughed softly after that, the kind of laughter that shakes off old dust rather than joy. The air between us no longer felt heavy, it was tender, like shared survival. After he left, I opened George's notebook again. Near the back, I found a page I hadn't noticed before. The ink was lighter, the handwriting shakier. "If you find this, it means I'm gone. I spent my life fearing that truth would destroy what little peace I'd built. But maybe peace isn't built, it's found. Margaret, when you read this, promise me one thing. Don't let my choices define your ending. Live again. In your own name, not mine." I closed the notebook and stared at the flickering fire. Live again. The word sounded like both a command and a blessing. That night, I packed a small suitcase. The next morning, I drove to the coast, the same seaside town where George and I had spent our honeymoon 45 years ago. The hotel we stayed in was long gone, but the shoreline remained the same. The wind carried salt and memory. The sea murmured like an old friend. I stood barefoot in the sand, the locket in my palm. I opened it one last time, his face on one side, Daniel's on the other. My family, however fractured, however flawed. I kissed the metal, whispered goodbye, and let it fall gently into the waves. It glinted once under the sun before the tide claimed it. For a moment, the ache rose sharp again, but then, unexpectedly, it eased. It felt as though the ocean had taken part of my grief and returned only stillness. I sat there for hours, watching the horizon shift from gold to gray to indigo, realizing that even endings can be gentle when you accept them. That evening, as I checked into a small inn by the shore, the woman at the counter smiled. "Traveling alone?" she asked. "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "For the first time in my life. In my room." I placed George's notebook on the nightstand and opened to a blank page. The pen hovered for a moment before I began to write not to him, but for myself. About forgiveness, about the weight of secrets, about the strange, quiet freedom that comes after truth finally settles. The last line I wrote that night was simple. He had 2 lives, but I still have one left to live. As I looked out the window, the moon hung low over the water, full and silent. Somewhere in that silver reflection, I imagined George watching not the husband who lied, nor the man who failed, but the part of him that had finally found peace. And for the first time since the funeral, I whispered into the dark, "I forgive you." The sea answered softly, carrying my words away. When morning came, I felt lighter, not whole, not healed, but alive, and that was enough. I walked along the shore, the cold sand beneath my feet grounding me in the present. Each wave that touched my toes felt like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Life didn't give me the ending I thought I'd have, but it gave me one I could live with. And sometimes that's all an old woman can ask for, to wake up, breathe, and know that even after betrayal, there's still something beautiful left in being human. So I smiled into the wind and whispered a final goodbye to both of them, the man who loved me imperfectly and the boy who carried his shadow with grace. Then I turned toward the road leading home, the sun rising behind me, lighting the path ahead, not with certainty, but with peace. And that, I think, was George's real gift, the truth, finally set free.